Welcome to the Roc'N Recovery Talk Show, featuring Carol Michelle and Jonathan Jacobs, bringing Rochester the latest news and resources for recovery from drug addiction.
Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's show of Roc'N Recovery. My name's Carol Michelle.
I am Jonathan Jacobs.
That's right, and today we have a very special guest with us. We have Andrew Burki, who is the Chief Public Policy Officer of the Hanley Foundation.
That's correct.
Awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about what the Hanley Foundation is?
Sure. So the Hanley Foundation is a legacy nonprofit. The main thing we do is evidence-based youth prevention. So we provide evidence-based youth prevention to about 65,000 kids. I work on public policy, so I'm in DC a lot, various state houses and things like that. Working on, everything from, naloxone access bills, funding for recovery high schools, trying to expand collegiate recovery programs, funding for recovery community organizations, some of the sort of larger bills, federal bills, work on for a long time, and then sometimes you get little wins at the state level. So that's what I do for them. They also provide support groups for parents, also for parents of loss is a big part of the sort of larger work that Hanley Foundation's doing. So they're kind of all over the place. They're pretty active in quite a few areas.
Yeah, well, I know they operate out of Florida, but are you present in other communities as well?
So they were initially set up, they're Palm Beach based,
Mm-hmm.
and they've sort of expanded throughout Florida. But we work on legislation all over the country through our public policy work, and they're looking at expanding the evidence-based youth prevention outside of Florida to some other communities. So they're really good about the way they do the evidence-based youth prevention, because what they'll do is they'll primarily focus on areas that are not being served. So they'll go into like rural communities and things like of that nature, rather than sort of trying to crowbar into a city where prevention services are already being provided. And it's one thing we do very poorly in the sort of nonprofit prevention space and recovery space is we have a lot of redundant services. So one of the things I really like about Hanley Foundation is they're always looking for where's the need.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, everybody stay with us. We're going to be right back. More coming right up on Roc'N Recovery. Hi everybody, thanks for watching Roc'N Recovery this week. So we've been talking to our friend Andrew Burki, and you mentioned about prevention programs for youth that are evidence-based. What are we talking about here?
Sure. So evidence-based youth prevention is basically a very fancy way of saying youth prevention that works. Right? That there's evidence to support that this works, that this produces the outcomes that you're looking for. So, I like to generally start from the premise that all prevention work is well intended, right? Like people, there's no one out there who's like, you know what? I really want kids to develop substance use disorders, right? They're all operating from sort of like a place of wanting to help. But there's, just tremendous variance in terms of how effective programs are. So one of the things we like to do in recovery, which is actually not great, is we go in, we'll take a recovering person and we'll send them in and, do like an assembly style thing. And so what you'll have is, there's some people who do it like a lot better than other people, and they incorporate music and they're cool. What is it? Rise Together, I think in Wisconsin is pretty solid on like some of their, jam session curriculum type thing. But the bigger problem is that a lot of times you have, let's say it's a 60-minute long assembly, you'll have someone talk for 58 minutes. They're just like, and I did a ton of drugs, and I partied so hard, and and I slept with all these attractive people, and which is probably factually inaccurate. Yes, you're like, there's definitely like a matrix there on quality of individual who's interested in you while you're actively using, but and then like for like 57 minutes, and then the last 3 minutes they'll be like, and then I found recovery, and it's awesome. Right? Thanks for letting me share. And like, what's the message really that you're sending to kids, right?
Glorifying the war stories.
Totally, 100%. And so this is why it's actually really important to do. And even if you're super cool, right? Even if you get someone who's like really, really cool and engaging, you are competing with the best video games in history for attention with children, right? So it's like, I mean, I don't care if you are a celebrity, like 2 days out, Fortnite is winning. Oh yeah. 100%, right? So it's really important that you have curriculum throughout the year, right? That there's engagement. There should be data collection involved, and then you've got some of these sort of like older archaic systems that are real holdouts, like the DARE program, right? Which is not super effective, although people love it. And then you've got stuff that's actually like damaging, like Scared Straight, right? Where you're like, it's crazy. Like you literally are in the only situation where it's okay to threaten a child with a future of sexual violence against them if they get caught with a treatable health condition. And that's really what's going on when you're like, you're a good-looking kid. You're not going to do too well in prison.
I've been looking for a boyfriend like you.
Totally. No, but like when you have a police officer or like a school, counselor, someone like making a statement like that, that is the only scenario where it would be acceptable to threaten a child with that. Like if it was in any other situation other than around substance use and substance use disorder, it would be a class action lawsuit. I mean, people like school districts would pay out like $10 million if it was like, better not get a B, pretty good looking kid. 100%. Like someone's going to jail for that. No, seriously.
Absolutely.
But with us, and this is one of the reasons that it's really important to, really make the distinction. Like it is not, we talk about stigma a lot, right? We're like, we got to reduce the stigma. We've been saying like, we got to reduce the stigma for 30 years. And it's not just, it's discrimination. Like you are fundamentally in a different category if you have a substance use disorder than if you have any other treatable health condition.
Yeah. Interesting story. You brought up the Scared Straight program. I have a family member, we'll say, who's a career criminal, spent almost 3/4 of his life in prison. He was on the Scared Straight show as an inmate down in Pennsylvania. And they orchestrated this little scenario where he would go into a jail cell where all these kids were waiting. He carried a dead rat in there and threw it on the ground and said, "This is your only friend for the next 15 years until you're released." And we saw it on TV. I was like,
that's so nuts. But that's like, you're talking about, you're causing childhood trauma.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't know. I've never seen a study on this, but Scared Straight probably should like increase your A score by a point if you're a child that is exposed to it. It's just nuts to think that is like considered like a viable pathway to helping kids avoid the horrors of active substance use disorder.
Another thing that I know it kind of rubs me the wrong way is we'll send people into schools maybe that have 6 months in recovery. They're young, so we think the kids are going to relate. And they start talking about what they know, which is using drugs, and about, I've heard it where somebody will say, and this drug made me feel like this, and this drug made me feel like this. And it was like, wait a minute, that's not the point of this, to try to encourage people to use drugs, so I think that's an issue as well.
Yeah, well, that's like the same thing. That's definitely an issue. That's the same thing with like the DARE program, right? Like, like that's how you learn how to like crush a can and poke holes and create a carburetor, right? Like you don't know that as a kid. Like someone has to show you how to do that, and there is, you know, I mean, if you're in my age range, there's a reasonably high chance that that person was a state-paid police officer in a dare program. They're like, this is brilliant. And you just use it and then you just throw it away?
Yeah.
Like, this is incredible. So you don't have any paraphernalia on you? This is amazing.
Can't trace them.
No. So, I mean, that is an issue. But yeah, I think, you know, and I think that's a tough part with recovery as well. We were talking about this with parents too, where you have, you know, parents going in and telling their story, and particularly if it's like a parent of loss talking to like a PTA, you know, that they have a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds. It's, I mean, you were saying like it's so far removed from, you know, where this can potentially get. And it's just something that we honestly, we just need to do better training on, right? Because I actually think we're underutilizing the parents of loss a lot. We really like to put like recovery people up.
Right.
But like when you tell your recovery story, like, I mean, like really, like everyone's going to clap for you at the end of it. But like, you're kind of saying like, this is, you know, like it's going to work out. This is the solution, right? Like I'm an example of the solution, you're both examples of the solution, and that isn't necessarily the best way to drive legislation, right? I mean, I think that we will probably get further, and we're probably going to do this in the 2020s, when instead of having strictly like a person in recovery, and I'm saying this as a person in long-term recovery, get up and speak, and then have like the parents of loss sort of, you know, there as like props. I mean, very powerful props, but props nonetheless, with their signs, you know, and pictures of their children. Like we need to start getting some of these parents of loss talking. I mean, this is like the drinking age in the most valuable market on earth. The United States of America is 21 instead of 18 because of, you know, some angry moms.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nobody messes with the moms, right? Like, presidents take meetings with them, governors, senators. No, because you'll get voted out of office, right? And I think if we, you know, as people in recovery, get smart about this and get tactical about it, we're really going to start activating the moms. And I mean, hopefully, you know, the 2020s will be the decade we actually change things on drug policies instead of, you know, burying, I mean, 500,000 Americans in the last decade from opioids. You've got close to 900,000 from alcohol. You know, literally millions of people that have criminal justice involvement, many of whom are still incarcerated as a result of our failed drug policy in the U.S. So, I mean, I think, I don't know, we're not getting there. I think the moms are going to take us across the line now. I have faith in them. I really do.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we know our audience. You know, you're going to speak to a legislator differently than you're going to speak to a child, or different from a parent.
Sure.
And I think that it's important that we get a little smarter when it comes to that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think more tact in our language and delivery is definitely going to take us to different places.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. The language thing's really interesting, right? So we say, you know, person with a, we do like person first language. So there's actually a lot of research to back this, right? So it's like you say person with a substance use disorder instead of addict, and, you know, or alcoholic or whatever. You know, recovery, I'm a person in long-term recovery instead of, you know, I'm sober or I'm clean, which is really more like 12-step language, which is one of the mutual aid groups. Since we don't talk about it, I'll assume that you don't, you might not be familiar with it. Whatever.
He who must not be named.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we didn't do ourselves any favor when the traditions came about in 1954 at the height of McCarthyism, and people were getting blacklisted from their careers for being alcoholics on the anonymity seat. But anyway, so, you know, hypothetically, if I was a member. But you know, I think we're focusing too much on like the language stuff, right? Like, yes, it's better. Like, language is important, but it's about equitable access to care. It's about community supports. It's about housing. I mean, I would prefer to be called addict and have funding to get me, detox, treatment, housing, tax credits, so small businesses employ me like right out the gate, then you call me a person with a substance use disorder and have no funding anywhere to be found. I mean, this is like, this is the stuff that's going on with harm reduction right now, right? And, if you look at how everyone else does harm reduction, there's wraparound services. What can we do to help you? What can we do to help your family, right? The whole structure. This is how Canada does it, Portugal, everyone, right? And in the U.S., we do this sort of like unfunded harm reduction, this like hospice care for the poor, where people just stay in a state of homelessness, like actively using, because there is no mechanism in place to get us out. And that's better.
Hold on a second. You said hospice care for the poor, and I've heard you say that before. Slow down for a second.
Sure,
now,
sure.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so if you have an act, especially when you're talking about opioid use disorder and a tainted heroin supply. There's fentanyl in the heroin supply. People are dying. You guys probably lose like a couple hundred people a year just up here in Rochester.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to get people you have to give people the option at least of getting out of that situation. So like, I support harm reduction, right? I think as one of, all the different tools in the toolkit to combat the current, drug and mental health crisis that we have going on in this country. But it's not a solution in and of itself, right? So if you set up a supervised injection site, that's great. That if I go there and I'm using under supervision, and there's a person there to revive me with life-saving medication like naloxone in the event that I overdose and die. But if I'm like a homeless, adolescent with who's having to commit crimes to support my very expensive drug habit, because drugs are expensive, you haven't resolved any of these other issues, right? So when we get serious about harm reduction in this country, we will pump massive amounts of funding into harm reduction so that every single day you go, it's like, do you want help? Are you ready to go to treatment? Like, what can we connect you with? Like, do you need housing support, right? Otherwise, like, you're literally just like leaving me to deteriorate on the streets, and we see that happening in different places. And it's just another system where we're not putting enough funding into it, and then we're wondering like why it's not as effective as it should be. Jail isn't a great system for us. As a person who's been incarcerated, like, I'm not a huge fan of people getting punished for a treatable health condition. But either way, like whether you throw us away in cages or throw us away on the streets, leaving people, and this is why I say hospice care for the poor, leaving people in a state where the expectation is further deterioration and death is not, the expectation should be, recovery, moderation, maintenance, like wellness, right? The goal should be wellness. The expectation should be that we help people. It's not that we do not have a lack of funding. We have a lack of funding in the right areas.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to have to go to a break, but we'll be right back. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, to Roc'N Recovery. We're here with Andrew Burki, and we are going to have him tell us a little bit, if you could please, about all of the new exciting stuff coming and that's currently happening in our area.
Well, so one of the things I think that's really exciting that's coming up is we're actually doing a much better job of coordinating on state legislation. So like, you're actually the state lead for a recovery advocacy project in New York, correct?
Absolutely.
So that I think is amazing, right? Because it's, we're looking for this like silver bullet to end the substance use disorder crisis in America, the current, even the opioid crisis. Even if you look at just the opioid crisis, we're like, oh my God, it's the opioid crisis. And It's actually the fourth opioid crisis. We had the opioid crisis in the 1800s with railroad expansion and opium, and then you have the one at the beginning of the 1900s with over-the-counter opioids and pharmaceutical stores that led up to the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act in 1914, which is the real beginning of the war on drugs in the modern era, even though we blame it on Nixon.
Right.
In the opioid epidemic after that, when you have veterans coming back from Vietnam, and then you have the current one that started really with the approval of OxyContin in Purdue in 1996. So we're looking for this like silver bullet, like how are we going to solve this?
Right.
And that's not what it is. It is a whole bunch of little wins, right? That change culture, that change laws, that change communities, and recovery advocacy project's so cool because you're able to coordinate. So like our recovery high school that we have down in Pennsylvania, the Bridgeway School that I'm on the board of, we have a piece of legislation, so $20,000 from the state goes to make sure that every single student is able to go to the recovery high school with these additional wraparound supports, right? So recovery coach, therapist, things along those lines. And now through this sort of connection with state leads in every single state, you have the ability to say this is what's working here. Like one of the things you guys up in Rochester are really, really successful with is, and I mean it helps because you've got Sheriff Baxter who's like on a campaign to save every life possible. Which is, I mean, a good sheriff goes a long way. Like let's be clear about this. Like other people couldn't pull it off.
Yes.
There's a good way that you do, but the one of the coolest things up here is the ribbons, right? The like this, we carry naloxone, your whole campaign to get naloxone in business. You have like a cab company up here that all the cab drivers are carrying naloxone, which is how it should be, right? So this is something that like through a recovery advocacy project, you can be like, this is how we went about doing this in Rochester. This is why this has been so successful, and expanded out to other states, because that's how it should be. If I have a heart attack in any public space anywhere in America, there's a defibrillator on hand.
Right.
Why, if I have an overdose, is it like, hope you overdosed in the right place?
Right.
Maybe the cops don't even carry it. And, you still have like police departments that are resistant in some states, right? You still have like, God, I was talking to this one police officer, they're like, well, and they have these sort of like archaic system, and this is why you have to get legislation. They're like, we carry Sharpies. This is probably like 4 or 5 years ago, and they mark our heads with a Sharpie. So they'll naloxone you the first time, they'll naloxone you the second time, but if there's 2 marks on your head, they won't revive you, which would never be. Wow. They'll literally let you die, right? So, I mean, can you imagine that? They're like, well, this snacker just keeps having heart attacks. It's right. You just keep eating Doritos. Like, I mean, what are we gonna do? Like, don't waste that electricity. With that defibrillator. I mean, that'd be crazy. Like, I mean,
that'd be absurd.
But again, this is why it's discrimination and not just stigma. I mean, the fact that, and there's people making this argument that are like, we're not going to keep, they put the needle in their arm, they brought this on themselves, let them die. Of course, right up until the moment where it's your child, because, it's very hard to hate up close.
Yeah.
One of the beauties of the Recovery Advocacy Project is when I started the Purple Ribbon campaign here, I put it on Mobilize Recovery. And Randy Anderson from Minnesota,
he's awesome. I love him.
He contacted me and he told me that there was a similar effort in Little Earth, Minnesota.
Yeah.
And they reduced overdoses there from 16 to 1 overdose deaths.
Yeah.
From 16 to 1.
That's awesome.
It was like great data to bring with me and carry with me to get it going.
But that's what you got to do, right? There is no, spoiler alert, there's no like national effort, one law, one bill that's going to change this thing, right? It's on the ground, in the trenches, community by community. It's what you guys are doing here. It's what they're doing in Dayton, Ohio. It's cleaning up the, sham sober homes down in Florida that State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg's leading the charge on. It's this whole effort down in North Carolina. I mean, that I'm hosting a panel at Wake Forest later this month, and I mean, they've got, peer support specialists in the hospitals doing stuff that like we haven't even thought of, right? Like they do screening for substance use disorder in their burn unit because which I didn't make that connection because I've never had like burns all over my body, but a shockingly large number of people that are burn victims are in a substance misuse or substance use disorder situation, right? You fall asleep drunk, you light the mattress on fire while you're on it, right? Things along those lines. And so like that's one of the things they're doing, and hopefully through efforts like Mobilize Recovery, which is really an event that spawned Recovery Advocacy Project, we're going to get better on communicating. And what'll be really awesome is when we start like literally handing off bills, like state by state. Like this is the bill we passed in West Virginia, and then we take it in 10 other states, right? The leads in 10 other states like go, and they're like, all right, let's try to. And even if we only get it through in 2 of the states, that's 2 more than we had before we made the effort.
That's right.
And that's the stuff. And you actually want like nobody has it perfect, right? You want this like the collegiate recovery legislation from Texas and the recovery high school legislation from Pennsylvania and the criminal justice reform bill that they passed up in like Maine, where you can like go into a police station and be like, here's my heroin, here's my paraphernalia, and they're like, great, welcome, like we're gonna pay for your detox, and not arrest you. Like this isn't even gonna go on the books anywhere, right? That's, you want to talk about harm reduction. That is.
Oh, that's a big
deal. You
deal.
can go up to a police officer and say, I have a drug problem and I need help, and they're like, we have resources for you. Or like the stuff that like Tara Mosley down in Kentucky. She's like totally, not by herself. She's got a whole bunch of like allies all over the place, but she has fundamentally reformed the view legislation, police response in the entire state of Kentucky. So this is like that, and that's like that's the stuff that gives me so much hope for the future. So, sorry I don't have like one big thing, but it's the sum of everything that's going to really fundamentally change the way we address substance use disorder in the United States of America.
Getting into high schools and middle schools is the absolute most difficult place because exactly like you said, until it's at my front door, I don't see it. But the medical community, Clifton Hospital, Geneva, Strong, all of them have been, they've continuously asked me to come back and share my experience. They've had me at recovery fairs. They had me at an event for RIT recently, actually just on the road. They're really interested, and the community has been fantastic to me. With, I guess I just have one of those stories that people want to hear and know how to say it in a way that like they can understand.
Plus the hair.
Yeah. A lot of early hours on the hair.
That's awesome. No, it's interesting on the schools because that's another area that we can really change stuff, and that's about getting like the advocate. And it's so hard. Like superintendents are. There are seated senators and members of Congress in D.C. that are easier to get a meeting with than a superintendent, right? But like they have so much ability to change things. Like there's this guy who's a superintendent in Harris County, which is it's Houston, right, in Texas, and this guy James Colbert, who's the superintendent down there, and he's someone who like been personally impacted. He talks about it openly with his brother and stuff, and not one of us. He's just a normie on a mission to do good. Right. And I love those guys. Allies are great. So, but he has the only public recovery high school, like truly public, like not a charter school, like, but it is, and it's been open. It's in its second year right now. So they opened the first year, 9 students. Second year, they're at max capacity at 40. And he has to look at like building more, but you go like if you're a family anywhere in Harris County that needs this recovery high school because your kid's entering recovery. My boss Jan Carnes and I actually went down and like toured it and stuff, and she's like, Jan's amazing. She's like this just like legend in prevention, And I mean, she was even impressed, right? And there's not a lot that impresses her.
Yeah.
So I mean, but we got down there. I mean, it's so cool because you have all these students, many of whom from very, very socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, from environments that are in no way, shape, or form conducive to their long-term recovery, and they are just crushing it because they're in this school. The school has actually become the most stable aspect of many of their lives, this public recovery high school, and because it's free, everyone can go.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So on the high school scene. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to go.
Sure. No, thank you so much for having me, though. I really enjoyed this.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Roc'N Recovery. Bye.